If you have a question, feel free to put it in the chat. I've tried to put in very specific slides to make me stop and see if there are any questions, but happy to take those at any time. And I am Beth Costner. I'm the Dean at Winthrop University's College of Education, Sport and Human Sciences. And I've been a national reviewer for NCTM. I think I started in like 2006 or something like that. So I've worked for NCTM for a long time. James, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm James Ritter. I'm associate professor here at Francis Marion University, coming here after my 6 years at the South Carolina Department of Education, where I was kind of on the receiving end of all of the different SPA reports and working with the reviewers to ensure that they got reviewed. But I will assure you that Beth is the master of knowing how these are written, and I look forward to seeing what she has to say too.
Okay. Well, I'm going to get started. James is going to help me with the chat. Really appreciate everybody being here. So I'm not sure that you know this, but NCTM will no longer support national review after the submission date of March 15th, 2024. And so they are leaving CAPE. They're getting on that train that several other SPAs have done. NCTM will still write the standards. We'll still use the same standards that NCTM has up now, and all the resources still work and will still be available to us. It's just the review will happen at the state level. If you were not in the morning session, more generally, this is fine for CAPE. It's just a different process. And so please make sure your CAPE coordinator at your institution knows that this change is happening. Don't even panic if you're in the middle of a cycle where you've either started collecting data, or maybe you had submitted a review and got conditions and you're waiting to submit the revised report. You can do all that. It's just going to go to the state instead of going to NCTM. And so a few really helpful resources. And again, I put in the chat PDF, so you should be able to get to these links. The current NCTM standards, make sure you look at those. But honestly, the most helpful document is that secondary level standards supporting explanations and rubrics. NCTM provides candidate specific rubrics. And the reviewers, whether it's a state or national, look at the actual rubric, not at the language that's in the component. And the language in the rubric is a little bit more specific on what's looked for. And so in order to meet a component, whatever your assessment is has to meet the candidate language at level 3. And I'll just be honest with you, if you're having trouble writing a rubric for something, NCTM will allow you to use these rubrics as your rubric for an assessment. So I can speak from just personal experience. We're using some of these rubrics for some of the course-based assessments, and also to revise and rethink some of our larger rubrics. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to go quickly through a couple of resources to get to the meat of what we need to talk about, but very helpful resource for you. Okay, so another one that I'm going to pause on for just a second so you can see this. NCTM has already done the alignment for the praxis subject area assessment, which is assessment 1. And that's for the 5165 test that we use in South Carolina. And so they give you this chart. You don't even have to think about it. You're not going to get any additional components beyond the ones that are here. And so if in the level of support, it says strong or moderate, that's considered met. If it says partial, it can be used as supporting evidence as a second assessment. And we do in NCTM have to have 2 assessments for some things. So if you're looking at this, you get 4 out of the 5 components in Standard 1 just from the praxis test, and don't have to do much justification for that. They also provide automatic alignments for EdTPA. If your particular institution has chosen to use EdTPA as their pedagogy assessment, and they did the same thing for the PPAT. Both of those are teacher performance assessments. And so you can see the components from EdTPA. You get a component in Standard 3, 4 actually in Standard 4, which is enough to meet that standard, although you have to have a second assessment. And you get all of the components in Standard 5. And it's very similar. There's a little bit of a difference between PPAT and the EdTPA alignment, but again, you're hitting those 3 standards, and most importantly, you're getting all of Standard 5, which we will talk about. I just think it's helpful to know that these exist. Couple other hints: NCTM and the state do not, because of the way NCTM standards are written, they don't accept the PLT for any of the information, and they don't accept the ETS major fields test if your math department happens to use that. And the final thing I will say, and I'll repeat this a lot, and that is EPP created things in general, especially if they are EPP wide, are really difficult to make the case for. So I'll give you some hints, but some institutions don't have a really very good assessment too, and so they try to do an exit test. Those are really tricky for NCTM, and so I'm going to try to give you examples of things that'll work. Hopefully, that'll allow you to avoid that. And then finally, before I pause about questions about these, NCTM does really like grades, and the reviewers really like grades and transcript review if you're at the master's level. And although CAPE has directions for using grades, NCTM has created their own. And so that is super helpful. And if you're going with the state, the template that was created for the state actually mirrors the NCTM document. So either you're going to be fine either way. You can get those templates by emailing the State Department to get those. And your CAPE people heard that this morning in the opening session. I think the most important thing I can say here, and then we'll come back to it later, is the biggest mistake I see when individuals use grades for assessment too is they don't use the templates. That's the number one mistake. So their data is not presented in the way it needs to be. Or 2, they just cut and paste their course description that's in the catalog over and over as the justification for the various components that they're saying match up. And that rarely gets you what you need to be able to match it to the really, really specific expectations that are expressed in the NCTM standards. So I'm going to pause here and see if there are any questions, James.
Question. There are none in the chat box, but I guess my question is to participants: how many of you have written these before, and how many of you have not? And the reason I ask that question is I know that if I had to sit down and write them right now and I'd never written one before, I would have questions right now. So I don't know if anyone that's not written one before has questions about what the things are that we talked about. Some of it's a little mathanese to me.
This is Jan. Hey, James and Beth and everybody, thank y'all so much for doing this. And I'm at University of South Carolina. And I've written several CAPEs before. I'm gonna ask a couple questions, and hopefully I'm trying to hold some of these because you probably will answer them. But one that Beth said actually was that, and I'm on the document, Beth, that you said was so helpful, right? The standards. Let's see, off the CAPE website, but basically you said we can use those rubrics, right? I heard you say that. We can use those.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's good to know too, because I have used before like the sample rubric. I don't know, sample rubrics from or use pieces of it. Anyway, so and I've kind of cut and pasted based on my assessments, but it's good to know. And I'm new. The last one I wrote, we were still writing under the 2012 standards, so I'm still getting my head around the 2020. But anyway, but that's good to know. So these rubrics where they have level 1, level 2, level 3, level 4, that we can use those, and NCTM or the state, I guess now will be fine with that. Okay, great.
Yes.
Good to know. Okay, I'll hold some other questions for you. May answer them.
Okay. And I will just say the difference between the rubrics that were provided before and these rubrics for this set of standards is they're written specifically with candidate language, not with program language. So they actually say the candidate will be able to do these things. And so they have to. Now, there are 4 levels in the candidate rubrics that NCTM provides. And so what we did at Winthrop, there's no magic sauce because you can use the 4 levels if you choose to. But if your EPP likes for you to use 3 levels, for example, MAT is what NCTM calls level 3. So there are actually 2 levels that don't meet and 2 levels that do meet. So what we did was we took level 4 from NCTM and made it target or exceeds expectations. We made level 3 meets expectations, and then we made level 2 as being not meets expectations. It does mean that, level 2 is a little broad, the bottom level is a little broad, and we did change a little bit of language sometimes, but because you have to have level 3 anyway, you can mess with your below anytime you need to.
Okay, that's really helpful because we tend to do 3 here too.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and I noticed like with standard 7, it looks like there's 3. And again, I'm looking at these kind of fresh, but it looks like there's 3. But the other ones, I see what you're saying, level 4, level 3, and level 2. And then do you point out when you write your report, do you point out like I'm using these from, okay, because I'm asking, because again, I had some challenges with using some example rubrics, but getting some feedback that it wasn't like that it wasn't right. So I had to point out like I'm pulling this directly from anyway. So that's good to know. Like I would point out directly to help the reviewer, just to say, hey, I'm pulling this directly from the NCTM, so they didn't have to try and figure that out. You do that.
Yeah, and we even put on our rubric documents, we even put lines aligned with the NCTM competencies use language directly from the candidate focused rubrics from NCTM. So we even note that on the rubric document. And just because you're using those doesn't mean you couldn't have other rows in your assessment that aren't NCTM. It's just what we did was on the row on some of our assessments, not every, but some of our assessments, the rows that are NCTM aligned, we specifically use their rubrics.
Oh, great. Okay. I might ask these other questions real quick. So my understanding, so the state review. So basically, I think as I'm trying to wrap my head around this, because I know science has had state review, so I've kind of been listening to my science colleagues. But it's the same. So is it the same? What am I trying to say?
It's the same. Yes, it looks like there are templates. There are templates even for the assessment. That's the one thing that, it used to be that they just gave you an outline from Kate for the assessment documents. There actually is a template for the assessment documents, and I'm going to show you some screenshots from those later in this thing.
It's just going to be our Kate, but the difference is the state's reviewing it, I think, right? That's correct. The only difference. Okay, so it's not like formatting for the most part is the same.
Right. Yes. And you don't load it. You don't load it into Ames. You email it to the State Department.
And again, I think you answered this. So we're using the same standards. It's not like the state has their own set of standards, same standards and then in the past, if you had a successful, if I remember this correctly, but if you had a successful review from Kate for one cycle, I'll say, right, if you were nationally recognized, then there was an like a C option for the next
That
time.
doesn't exist anymore.
Okay, all right, good to know. Okay, all right, those were my questions. Thanks.
They changed the standards too quickly for that to be an option anymore. All right, I'm going to go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, Casey noted that there's been some changes in the standards. Did you have a question about that, Casey, or were you just noting that there's been some changes?
I just find it really hard, the new standards to write up. They just seem really challenging because they're very ambitious and coming up with rubrics. I mean, even the rubrics they give are helpful, but it seems like I'm just having trouble like assessing students or according to these new guidelines. They seem very ambitious, and so coming up with tasks and rubrics seems hard. That's my comment.
And that's a good transition, because I'm going to try to give you some suggestions for all six assessments that might help you with that. So I'm going to go ahead and go forward, and I've got other places where we're going to stop with questions. But here's the assessment summary, and I have only talked about assessments 1 through 5 here. I'll pick up 6, 7, and 8 at a later point, but because assessments 1 through 5 are standardized, I want to start with those. So assessment 1, Praxis, it actually meets all but one of the competencies in standard 1, so it's really helpful. Really strongly encourage you to use grades for assessment 2, because standards 1 and 2 are focused on what the candidate can do, not on what they can do in the classroom. And so grades and transcript reviews are really helpful to meet those standards, and using the language from the component itself to justify. So if the component says that students understand concepts in number theory, then you would say, in this particular course, here are some example concepts in number theory, and our candidates do this in this particular class. So really helpful to have grades as assessment 2. Assessment 3 needs to be something about lesson planning, and so the most common is a unit plan or some series of lessons that students do in a methods class. The cautionary thing that I would tell you about this is that if your institution has a common rubric that they use for all unit plans at the institution, you need to create an addendum that has the math-specific language from NCTM. And there's really 2 different ways to do that. One way is just to have another section or another rubric that's very math specific. The other way is to add language to the rows that you want to use from the EPP wide assessment, and just say, in a math classroom, this must include, and then put the language from NCTM's rubric right under it. We do that for our internship evaluation, and that's really super helpful. Our unit plan is program specific, so it's not as hard to do it there. But if you use an EPP wide assessment, that can be hard for assessment 3. Assessment 4 has to be your student teaching. The thing I would warn you all about here is the NIET rubric. That is what the SCTS 4.0 rubric that most institutions use is really problematic for NCTM. There are way too many things in each one of the rows, and they're not math specific. So if your institution, which I think most of them do, uses that state rubric, I would have an addendum to that is evaluated for your students, and that is more work for your supervisors, and I understand that, but you're really going to shoot yourself in the foot with only using the NIET. There are some lines, some rows in the rubric that work well about questioning and a couple of things like that. But overall, that rubric is really problematic for NIET or for NCTM.
Could
And
you say a little bit more about that, Beth?
sure. So one of the things that's true in that kind of that South Carolina, I'm going to call it the NIET rubric because that's what it's based on. The NIET rubric will have the candidate, maybe it's about problem solving and critical thinking and use of technology and something else. And so we don't use it, so I don't know it as well as some people might, but there'll be like 5 or 6 things that are bulleted points in one row of the rubric. And the evaluation for METS is that they meet some of the following. Well, then there's no guarantee that the thing that they met was the problem solving, right? They maybe have met this one, or the thing isn't necessarily technology, and technology doesn't read as math specific technology. And so that's really problematic. And it's really hard to mess with the NIET rubric the way I was talking about, where you could add language to it for NCTM specific, because if you do that, then that throws off validity and reliability studies that have already been done, and your CAPE person's head's probably gonna explode. So if you're using that NIET rubric, look for a few links because they are there, but really, really think about some math specific addenda. And so what we do is we just have a dimension 5 is what it is called. And it is literally, here's a component we haven't covered elsewhere in our program. And then we use the 3 things from NCTM as our measures. And we measure it at midterm and final only. And honestly, you probably could measure it at the final only. Does that help, Casey?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. And then assessment 5, the most common assessment 5 is a teacher work sample where the student, so in assessment 3, the students might not teach the lesson plan or the unit plan, they're just measuring planning, and that's great for standard 3. So don't be worried that they're not teaching it. You just need to be clear whether they are. Assessment 5 is where the students typically develop some kind of unit plan in their particular placement in student teaching. They collect student data, they reflect on that data. It's a whole kind of big project in that final semester. Again, that one might be EPP wide assessment, so just add some math language to it. But the whole point of assessment 5 is to measure the student's impact on the candidate's impact on K-12 student learning. And so the other one I've seen there is an assessment project where the students are creating a lesson or a unit and doing a pre and post test and then reflecting on their data, which kind of is what happens in a teacher work sample.
Beth,
Yeah.
So at our school, we kind of have a big project that we split that up. So there's this massive thing they're planning, but they're also doing this analysis of pre and post and stuff. That's okay to split those, like that one project up into 2 things. I guess the other question I have is I really find around the what is it, the components for planning are really hard. I don't know if other people are, if we're going to get,
we're going to look at those in a minute. We're going to look at those in a minute because I'm going to go through each standard with you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Beth, we do have a couple of questions. One of them was about adding a supplementary addendum, and Michael Ann says, can the rubric be added below the SCTS questioning indicator, for example, so that it's math specific?
Yeah, I think you can. It's just be a little bit careful with that. And Michael Ann, you know what I'm saying when I say this. If you change it too much, that messes with the validity and reliability for CAPE. That's the only thing. If it's EPP created you're going to do validity and reliability on what you've got, right? So it doesn't mess with it that much. But if you mess with an external rubric like the NIT, that gets a little tricky. And I can, talk about that more if we have time at the end, or you're more than welcome to reach out to me. And I can even give you some examples. All right, I'm going to keep going if that's okay. Standard 1. So NCTM has required components, and you have to hit at least 50%. You have to hit more than 50% of the components. And so what I've done on each of the standards, and remember the link to this is in the chat, I've tried to point out to you which components are required. NCTM also defines the number of assessments you have to have per standard. You can have more, but you have to have at least so many. And I've tried to give you how you can do that and a couple of hints. So that's the way this next series of slides are going to be handled. So standard 1 is all about content knowledge. So it's things like they know how to do calculus, they know number theory, they know discrete math. So it's very, and it used to be that was that big, huge document that you had to fill out about which, here's the component and here's how I've done all these individual sub things under the components. I mean, it was massive. This is the standard that I think has gotten a little bit cleaner in this new revision. However, in standard 1, all of the components are required. So A, B, C, D, and E, you have to meet them all. You'll meet 4 of them from just Praxis alone in this state. So that is a dream for us. You do have to have 2 assessments. Assessment 1 and assessment 2 have to be matched to standard 1. And again, remember, assessment 2 is almost always grades. So you got to really hit that component. I think it's component 1B that's not covered in Praxis. You've got to really hit that hard in your grades document. Then I've just reminded you here, evidence needs to be focused on what the candidate can do. So assessments like assessment 3, lesson planning, and assessment 4, internship, student teaching, don't give you data for standard 1, because that's about what the candidate is doing in the classroom for K-12 learners, not about what they know themselves. I know there's some overlap. I'm not acting like there's overlap, but you're measuring their impact on the K-12 learners, not on their learning of content itself. So assessments 1 and 2 are really the 2 that you want to use for that. Then standard 2 is also kind of a content-y standard, but it's the processes. So this is problem solving, reasoning, and modeling. And so again, NCTM makes you hit them all. So 2A, 2B, and 2C, you have to have 2 assessments. So the 2 assessments that I see that work the best are assessment 2, which are grades or transcript review, or what I encourage you to do is grades or transcript review. They're really hit hard. Like if you're talking about calculus and you're saying calculus meets 2A, which is the problem solving standard. So how do they solve problems in multiple contexts within that calculus course? 2 sentences. We solve problems when we're doing rate of change in a Calc 1 class, and we make sure we cover problems from the natural life sciences as well as engineering. That would be enough of a description to be able to talk about how that course requires the candidate to show that they are able to problem solve within that class. So assessment 2 is where you're going to get a lot of your data, but because you have to have 2 assessments, you've got to come up with something else. It's typically put into assessment 6. So it could be a problem solving assignment that you do in a methods class or one of your classes in general in the math content, where the students maybe have, you know, a set of problems or a set of proofs. You don't have to cover all at 2A, 2B, and 2C. You just have to cover at least one of them with that second assignment. And so what we're doing is we have a problem solving assessment in assessment 6, and we're using, in addition to some other things, we're measuring components directly from the candidate rubrics. But I've also seen addendums to the internship student teaching where it talks about the candidate demonstrated their problem solving ability or their modeling ability or their reasoning ability when they were working with students in the field. Those are a little harder to make the case for, but I've seen over the years in reviewing assessment packages from institutions, that's possible, whereas it's not possible in assessment 1 or in standard 1, it is in standard 2. Okay, I think I've said all that. I've put more text on here than what I'm trying to say because, again, I've provided those slides for you, and I'll put that in the chat again just in case you missed it earlier. All right, I'm going to pause here because standards 1 and 2 go together and just see if there are any questions.
Question, Beth.
It's fine.
And my question is I know in the past institutions have received feedback, and you mentioned a lot about components, and many of the feedback were that they were not explicit enough in dealing with components. Do you have any feedback or any suggestions that you can leave us with about that?
Yeah, really go and look, because the candidate rubrics are written at the component level. So, for example, if you're doing grades and you're trying to make the case that candidates met 2A, for example, then go to the candidate rubric for component 2A, level 3. Use that language to explain how this class is meeting 2A. So if the language says that the students are able to demonstrate their reasoning skills by showing it in multiple contexts, then what I would write in my justification for 2A is, in this course, students are expected to show their reasoning in multiple contexts by, and here's what we do in the class. So it's really, really, I'm especially at the state level, it's going to be really, really hard for the state to come back, state reviewers to come back and say you didn't meet a component if you use NCTM's language. I know NCTM has not always been overly consistent on that, and NCTM has to own that, but that's not true from what I've seen in the state.
Thanks, Beth.
So, Beth, we don't have to have a separate assessment that's specifically problem solving. If they're taking a calculus class and they're doing minimum and maximum problems, we can say that is showing problem solving or related rates or something like that.
Yeah.
So that's a whole nother assessment I can get rid of because.
Well, let me just give this caveat. You will need 2 assessments in standard 2. So yes, you're probably going to get all your components checked off from your grades, all 3 of the components checked off. That's actually not enough for standard 2. You have to have another standard that measures at least one of the components. It doesn't have to measure all 3 of them in standard 2, but it has to measure at least one of the components. And again, we picked the problem solving component for ours as the one we were really going to hit hard in assessment 6, but it could be the reasoning. So in your number theory class where they're learning how to do proofs, and maybe they have to get up and communicate their reasoning both by presenting the proof as well as presenting it to their peers in their class, that's going to get you 2B, right? And so maybe you just pick one of those and you have a rubric that measures how well they did in the written as well as the oral presentation of that. And it could be a 3-line rubric or a 2-line rubric that just measures that, and it's done quickly in your number theory class, and then boom, even though your number theory class was one of the GPA classes that you used. But you do have to have a second assessment for standard 2.
You being a second one for each of these 2A, 2B, 2C?
No, somewhere in, this is the most confusing part, somewhere in standard 2, you have to have a second assessment. So either 2A, 2B, and or 2C. Doesn't have to be on all.
I couldn't use one class for all 3.
You could use one class, but that's still only one assessment because that's assessment 2, your GPA. So now you have to come up with a second assessment that's going to measure something that's talked about in the standard 2 components.
I think I get it.
Okay. And again, it's just a EPP created something that's embedded in a course where you have a rubric that is specific to standard 2 and you're doing it. And that can be your assessment 6. You need 6 assessments, right? You can have 8, but you have to have 6. And so if you've got something that you're already using, then I would just continue to use that instead of getting rid of it.
I made an assessment 8 where I had a problem solving thing that came from Modern Geometry Project, a reasoning and communication experience from Calculus 3 where they do an oral exam, and mathematical modeling and use of mathematical models experience from a statistics project.
Right, but you could probably reduce that down a little bit is what you could do instead of having to do all 3.
Okay.
And if you have something you want some feedback on, I can't guarantee you, but I would be happy to look at it and tell you
Okay.
kind of what I think.
Thank you.
But it would be okay just to have one of those, right?
Yeah,
If I understand?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
one of them would qualify for all 3 of these areas?
It wouldn't, but it doesn't have to remember, it doesn't, that second assessment does not have to cover all 3 of the components. It only has to cover one of the components. It's great if it covers more than one, but it doesn't have to cover more than one. Theoretically, you could get 2A and 2B from grades and 2C from an assignment, and that would cover, because you just
Okay.
have to show that you've used 2 assessments in standard 2.
Okay.
And you have to show that you've met all the components. Okay. All right. I'm going to go. All right. And so standard 3, so there is one required component. So you must, under absolute requirements, you must meet standard component 3A. And then you have to meet at least 3B or, let me stress, or 3C, because that'll give you more than 50% of the components. Now, it's great if you cover all 3 of them, but you don't have to. So 3A is a must, and then 3B or 3C is a must. You only need one assessment. So if you can do that in one place, that's enough. The places if you have 2, that's great. The places I typically see this are in 3A, assessment 3 or assessment 4, which is lesson planning or the internship student evaluation. However, an EPP-wide assessment is not going to have 3A, 3B, or 3C in it. You're going to have to use additional language for that. And at the end, if we have time, if not, I'll figure out how to put them in the link. I can show you how we've done that at Winthrop pretty successfully. And we're using the standard language rubrics from NCTN. Okay, I'm going to keep going just because of time. I'm trying to watch that too. All right, standard 4. So standard 3 is about the students' pedagogy within their planning. Standard 4 is about the pedagogy within their instruction. So that's the big difference between standard 3 and standard 4. Standard 3 is about their planning. Standard 4 is about when they're teaching. And There are 7 components in standard 4. It's the biggest standard of all of them, but none of them are required. Instead, you have to get 4 out of the 7, but you do have to have 2 assessments. And so, because this one is an instruction one, if it's an assessment like assessment 3 that is only lesson planning, you're not going to get standard 4 from that. You're going to have to figure out something that's in a placement. So now, if your unit plan, the students create it and then they teach it, that's great. You're going to get you're going to get some stuff from assessment 3. I will say a little caveat, the way 4A is written, you might make the case that even if they're planning, they get 4A, but that's a little bit tricky. I'm just going to be honest with you. So again, remember on assessment 4, you're probably going to need an addendum. Assessment 5 is that impact on student learning assessment. So that's like a teacher work sample, EdTPA, those kinds of things. Just make sure it's math specific, because and we can pull up the standards here in a minute and look at standard 3 and standard 4. If you're really struggling, then that might be where you need to use assessment 6, 7, and or 8. NCTM and the state are very happy with 6 assessments if you can get everything covered. So never feel like you have to have assessment 7 and 8 for mathematics. It's only if you need them. And so I always set up a chart that has all the components, and I'm figuring out where I'm covering it. That's what I do in assessments 1 through 5, and then we look at what we're missing, and that's what we focused at assessment 6 on. So don't feel like you have to do 8 just because there are 8. All right, questions? Those two kind of go together, planning and then teaching. All right, I'm going to keep rolling. Standard 5 is impact on student learning. And this is kind of positive impact on student learning. None of the components are marked as required, but you need 2 out of 3 of the components covered to meet the standard. You only have to have 1 assessment. And again, that's typically assessment 5. Remember, EdTPA and PPAT actually are enough. If you have those 2, it's automatic that you're going to get standard 5 covered. If you have an EPP-wide teacher work sample, chances are, if you just add some math language to it, you're going to be fine and meet standard 5. Again, it's when people don't add the math-specific language, because it says stuff like you're showing growth in these across mathematical areas and things like that are just not in an EPP-wide assessment. You must include both the NCTM language is formal and informal assessments. That is interpreted as formative and summative assessments. I'm not sure why the NCTM standard writers used formal and informal. It's really formative and summative. And then you do have to consider whole group as well as subgroups, because the 3 components in standard 5 have this part at the bottom of the rubric that specifically says that you've considered subgroups in the data. So if you're doing a pre and post assessment, yes, you've shown growth overall in the class. Sorry, you've shown growth overall in the class, but then the student needs to maybe look at English language learners. Did they have the same growth or some other subgroups within? And it could be students on IEPs versus students not on IEPs and things like that. You do that naturally in some teacher work samples and some you don't. Standard 6 is the professionalism standard. In my opinion, it is the hardest one. I know Casey said standard 3, but I think standard 6 is the hardest one. It is the one where you might need a separate assessment. And the reason why I think it is hard is it's because it's not uncommon on like assessment 4 to have something that says that the students attended professional development and things like that, but it has to be math specific professional development. And so somehow you're going to have to capture that they weren't just going to school-wide professional development, that there were maybe a PLC, I don't even remember what PLC stands for. It's learning community, professional learning community, in their school that's just math. And so they're looking at math data for the school and thinking about improvement things that could count as professional learning. And so I cut one of the rubric descriptors just to show you in the bolded areas that it does, you're not going to have an EPP-wide assessment that asks about students' mathematical identities and promoting positive mathematical ideas. That's going to have to be an addendum, or you're going to have a separate assessment. And it could be some kind of reflection assessment that happens during internship or student teaching, that looks at having students reflect on how they've impacted mathematical identities, what their own mathematical identity is, and how that's promoting positive mathematical identities. You're going to have things about motivation in a standard rubric. That's not going to cut the mustard for this kind of language. All right, I'm going to pause again because standard 6, 5, and 6 kind of go together. All right, I'm going to go on. I'm horrible with wait time. All right, so standard 7, most SPAs don't have a standard 7. The thing to keep in mind with standard 7 is they both have to be met, but they're not met within a assessment. You do not have to tag an assessment to standard 7. Let me say that again. You actually should not tag an assessment to standard 7. Standard 7 is about the types of field experiences that the person has and who the people are that are overseeing that experience or supervising that experience. And so you're going to actually do that in the context. So when you describe the field experiences, you're going to talk about that they were in settings that include or consider cultural, ethnic, linguistic, gender, and learning differences within the field experience. And that's all done in the context. And then for the component B, the big thing there is that your supervisor has secondary mathematics teaching experience, which is really what we're looking for. But it does say or equivalent knowledge base, just to understand that like being a principal and having supervised mathematics teachers is typically not enough. It's going to be where somebody maybe within their research spent time, they weren't the instructor of record, but they spent quite a bit of time in a secondary school doing things with students that could count. Maybe they've done a lot of professional development with teachers, or they themselves have attended professional development. That's what you're kind of looking for that equivalent knowledge base. The state doesn't require you to do the faculty table that's in Ames because they assume that because you're regionally accredited that your faculty have already been reviewed and meet standards, but you will have to talk about, there's an optional box, you will have to talk about who does supervision and what kind of experience they have. So it could say something like, Beth Costner does all the supervision of student teaching. She was a middle school, which is secondary. She's 712 certified, or was. 712 certified, and she taught for 6 years in mathematics in a middle school in the state of Kentucky. So then that automatically makes me able to supervise teachers in the field. So just, I want to really emphasize, it says secondary, which means middle school or high school. Last thing yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to note that NIET, people who are trained in NIET to supervise student teachers are not trained by grade span. So
Correct.
that might be a conversation that someone wants to have with their Office of Field Experience if they don't know, because NIET says good teaching is good teaching, which it is, but that
Right.
doesn't mean that those folks have that background.
Correct. And it could be just that, maybe there's, and it's who's giving the evaluative review. It's not the mentor teacher. And so I've seen successfully where someone has, so it's a mathematician that's doing most, or a former principal who's doing most, I'll start with that, who's doing most of the student teachers for secondary. For example, you're a really small program, and so you have one person that supervises for all. Well, then find somebody in the school who's not the mentor teacher, who has mathematics teaching experience at the secondary level, and have them do an evaluation of the individual, not just a mentoring observation. And that could work. So you're kind of doing it as a team. So you have an on-site observer as well as a university supervisor. Would be one way to handle that.
The other thing that I was going to mention is 7A, where you talk about being clear about the settings. I know that at my university, some of the information such as gender and ethnicity and some of those things are confidential when you start looking at records. So I don't know. I worked at another university where we had student teachers collect demographic evidence as part of going into that field experience. So it may be something that has to be done that way rather than another way. I don't know.
Yeah.
What is your experience?
I think you just have to we have to do this for CAPE, right? We have to have people in multiple settings. So you could just say across the field experiences, our field office makes sure that students are placed in Title I schools that have ethnic and cultural and ethnic and linguistic diversity, and we make sure that at some point the students have our candidates have experience with students that are on IEPs. That would be enough. You're just describing it in the
Gotcha.
Context. So the student doesn't have to collect any data. You're just verifying for the reviewer that there is some thought put behind the placements, and they're not all in an AP calculus class. Not
Gotcha.
that there couldn't be linguistic, gender, and all those kinds of differences in an AP class. It's just less likely sometimes in some areas of the state. In other areas of the state, it's not. So I really want to stress that. And so if that's where you're placing them all, you just have to justify that. Okay. Other suggestions, use state templates and justify specifically to the component. I'm not going to read all these because I've said most of them, and I'm cognizant of time. I will say on the last one, be strategic in your alignment. One of the mistakes that people make is if something has anything to do, has problem solving as a tiny part of a rubric line, they try to align it to the problem solving, and it's just not enough. Don't align it. Don't over align, and don't put multiple components on the same row. Be really, really strategic in what you are doing, because the reviewers will miss something if you over align. All right. I am going to skip this question and skip through because you've got these slides. I've intentionally put some things because I want a little bit of time for questions at the end. And Casey, if we need to stay on and look at standard 3, if I run out of time, we will. The only assessments I haven't talked a lot about are 6 and then 7 and 8. And so I just wanted to give you a couple of things. I kind of mentioned this, but if you haven't been able to hit standard 2 and 2 assessment somewhere else, assessment 6 is a good one for that. Problem solving, some kind of embedded project that's in a math class that's about reasoning, or if you have a modeling class and the students have a project in the modeling class and there's a rubric for that, that's great. Standard, you can also hit standard 6 there. A couple of the assessments that I've seen there are reflections on what is happening in their whole, actually their entire time that they have been in the teacher ed program, but maybe specifically in their internship about how are they impacting students' positive mathematical identities, or if you expect them to engage in professional development, maybe you expect them to watch webinars. That would be a place where you could record what the student could record what they had done. Then you have them reflect on that, and then you have a rubric that evaluates that reflection shows that they have been engaged in mathematics specific professional development. So assessment 7 and 8 are, like I said, are not expected from NCTM. There's no unwritten rule that you need 8 assessments like there are in some SPAs. It's really important just to examine your data and target missing components. And just, have I mentioned that NCTM provides candidate focused language rubrics? And so I'm going to actually stop sharing my screen so I can pull up standard 3 so that Casey and I can talk about that, but I'll take other questions as well.
Casey stepped out on us,
Casey had
Beth,
to
so we're
leave.
good.
Okay, all right. He knows how to reach you, Beth. That sounds ominous.
I have a question. I'm just trying to figure out what exactly do they mean by identities? You know, like when you think of identities, what exactly? I haven't looked at the rubric recently. I just came back from my Fulbright away for a whole year. But so what do they mean by that? Identities. I don't remember.
Sure. And that's actually a brand new standard. That kind of language was not there in the previous. And so it's really talking about, or this is how I have always interpreted it, is it's helping the students see themselves as mathematicians. Like they can solve problems, they can model data, they are successful, they are motivated to do the mathematics. So a question on a EPP-wide assessment that talks about motivation actually gets at the identities, but it's not getting at specifically mathematics identities. So how through the motivation process, do you try to help the students see themselves as capable in mathematics? And so, it might be that a student reflected on how they use problems that are of interest to the students so that the students can see the value of mathematics and their ability to do mathematics in the real world. And that would be a great, if the student was reflecting on it, or if you had it on an addendum to a EPP-wide assessment of student teaching, then that's what the supervisor who was supervising them would be looking for. Are they using things within the classroom that help the students see themselves as mathematicians and capable of doing mathematics, and that mathematics is meaningful to them? Does that help?
Yeah, that helps. That helps. I was just, just the word identity.
Yeah, that is a loaded word for sure, but it is here. It is. It really is talking about seeing themselves as mathematicians.
Is capable of doing math and probably.
And it's meaningful.
Yeah, Because many of them don't see it as meaningful, really. Okay. I just wanted some clarification though.
No, that's what
Yeah,
I'm here to try to do.
I mean, I've done this since 2004, but every time there's something new to learn, something to, something that you've forgotten, because once you do it, you feel like, oh, I'm not doing this again.
And unfortunately, just because of how the cycle works with CAPE, as soon as you hear back that the EPP was
Yeah.
approved, then you've got to start making sure you're aligned with the standards in your new standards in your program, because you need at least 2 years to collect your data, and then boom, you've got it, and then it's 3 years and you're having to submit again. So there is no resting when it comes to all of this stuff.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's good. That's good.
Jan, did I get to all your questions? You said you had others, but
Yep. I think you got them for now. It's a little bit, we just have kind of arrived exactly what you were talking about. Like I've kind of survived the last one.
and COVID probably happened somewhere in there.
And so I'm just trying to recover from that and get my head around, state review and new standards. So I think I have some time, but I want to still jump and I thank y'all for doing this because it's really helpful.
If you all won't mind, I thought I would just pop up the state templates so that you knew what they looked like. So here is the transcript analysis template from the state. So it's just got some demographic information, and then you describe the assessment. You have to answer those questions about this is the transcript review one that I pulled up first. That was how you review transcripts if you have an MAT. Then here's the component, here's the course or courses that match with this component, and this is why. And you can add boxes there. There's the GPA policy that we've always had to do. And then there are the data tables. I'm going to switch over to a different one. This is the this one is that's the cover. That's not the one I meant. This is the general one, so it looks very similar to what you just saw. It's just when you get down to the candidate data part, it's really what your rubric item is, not something not GPAs and stuff like that. Does that make sense, Jan?
No, but I can.
Okay.
The GPA one looked a lot like the GPA one. I mean, I'm getting old, my eyesight's going, but I think the GPA one looked a lot like the NCTM.
Absolutely. GPA. It was based, I'll just be honest with you, it was based on the NCTM one.
Yeah, well, I'm thankful just because that's the one I've done, so I'm more familiar with it. So this one you were saying it's aligned with the rubric. I was just trying
so this one is, so there's 4 templates for assessments. There's a cover, but then there are 4 templates for assessments. There's a praxis template, because there you don't have to attach assessments and all that kind of stuff, but you do have to talk about subscores. So there's that in there. Okay. Then there are 2 that are kind of grade oriented. One, if it's an undergrad program or a grad program where all the courses are actually taken on campus. So you have, here's what the course was, here's what this course does, and here's the grade our students made in that course. So there's one on grades. And then there's one on transcript review. Do you have an MAT?
Well, we don't have an MAT anymore, but we have, we have an MT, and you can be like a 5th year. So those kids have taken everything at USC, but you can also be what we're calling a career changer, whereas I'm having to review transcripts. So
you would use the transcript review for that program. So, so there you're just talking about how the difference here is you talk about how the transcript review works. You provide your form for transcript review, so it has categories of things that you're looking for, and it might even have, here's the course at USC that kind of matches, or courses that kind of match with this category, so
Right.
that if a student took them at your institution, they're kind of checked off automatically. And you actually only report overall GPAs, not by the course,
Okay.
in a transcript review.
Okay.
And but you do have a second table where you have to talk about if somebody did, how many of your students didn't meet all the things that you say that they had to meet. Like you
Right.
have somebody come in from an engineering degree and they didn't take anything in abstract algebra or linear algebra, so that you say, so we had a student who
Right.
didn't have this, and so we had them take the undergraduate courses on campus in order to make up for that. So you do have to kind of tell that. So there's Praxis, there's two that can kind of work with GPAs depending on which category you're in. And then there's this general one for everything else.
I got it.
Right? So if you've created an assignment like the internship evaluation, you'd use this for the internship evaluation because you actually have a rubric, right?
Yes.
And so you can say, here's the item from the rubric, here's the standard
Yes.
that item, and then here's the data. I mean, this is just a sample table. You don't have to use this table.
Yeah. These are like,
Exactly.
I got it. So like these are data tables, like our Office of Assessment will create, I mean, we have to input the data, but they'll create these first, but we just use these instead. I understand.
Yes. Yes. And you can, if they give you tables and they give you the information that you need, you don't have to use this table.
Okay. Yeah.
And then it's got a place to talk about the data. Then it's
Yeah.
got a place to interpret what you learned from the data.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
then you have to, at the bottom, attach what you gave to the student, the rubric, and all that kind of stuff.
Got it. So this is kind of just a format of what I did, like kind of in an outline format before. I would just chunk it in there. Got it. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. And I'll tell you, when we submitted our SPAs, because we just submitted our SPAs in the fall, when
Okay.
we submitted our SPA reports to the national review, we actually used the state templates and they were accepted by everybody except NELP for Ed Leadership. They have really, really specific requirements for data tables. So
Yeah.
we just use those data tables instead of these more general data tables.
Yeah. Okay. Got it. Very helpful.
But
Thank
it was just, I mean, this is how my brain works. So it was a whole lot easier for me to help people this way than it was for me to do it the other way.
you. Yeah. My brain thinks in tables as well. I always,
Yeah.
always create tables. So yeah, that's great.
My English language arts people want to always write these long narratives, which is fine. Even in the state review, you can write long narratives. It's just, holy moly, you could have put that in this amount of space in a table. You realize that, right?
My doc students that I work with, they're like, she's going to make us do a table, because I'm like, this is confusing. Just put in a table. I want a table. So yeah, I get it.
When I was in the math department, they used to call me table woman. So
Yes, I understand. Well, you're my people, because like I said, I'm all about tables too.
James just put Jackie's email in the chat. So if you want to get the templates, she will send those to you. Because they're Word documents, they're not published anywhere on the web, because that's problematic when you do it. So she'll just email you the Word docs so you can get those. And your CAPE person maybe already did CAPE review, CAPE coordinator may have already done that. So just check with them.
Right. Okay.
There is a cover sheet, Jan, because it's not going into Ames. There is a cover sheet that asks for all the information that you would typically just type directly into Ames, like what's the name of the program, what type of program is it, who compiled the report, who's your, a CAPE contact, and all that kind of stuff. So she'll send you that too. But for the state review, it's a cover sheet and then a document for each of the assessments.
Okay.
Because they only want one document per assessment, but they don't want it all as one big PDF.
Okay, sure. Okay, great. Okay. Well,
Any
thanks, guys.
any parting questions or conclusion, Beth, since we have another one of these exciting ones coming up at 12:15?
I know. No, I'm done. I think I'm doing that one too. So I'm gonna have to jump over but Cassie hopefully is already there. So
Okay.
Thank
It's been a
you.
pleasure to see you all and meet you all.
All right.
Thanks.
thank you. And email me if you need me.
Okay,
All right, we
Thank-
will.
so helpful.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you, James.
No problem. Thanks, Beth.